Well, you know, and so I wanted to bring you out for your opinion, whether it was a good or bad thing, Schmitt, because you were kind of the experienced guy.
Yeah, well, I wrote this book in 1999, Experiential Marketing.
Yes?
As we've heard many times, the world was very different then.
It was very different. This was, the internet was a new thing. I remember meeting Schmitt, and he said, I'm building this thing, it's called a website. And that was the cutting edge thing. At that point, if you built a website for your book or just anything, people would throw money at you.
I'm not even sure that in that book I talked much about websites.
There was something about that. That was like a minor chapter or section. You were talking about different media, and there was sort of this emerging thing.
Well, the idea was basically that marketers and people bragging too had been talking about all sorts of things about product, about what I call functional features and benefits. Okay? Basically, the selling proposition of the product. But nobody had really looked at it from a sort of customer perspective. It was always, the marketers would always say, well, you have to focus on the customer, but it meant nothing. I don't know if it means much more nowadays, practically.
Well, was there,
nowadays it's interesting.
Yeah.
Because nowadays they say, well, they have to look this development, so it's back to the product.
Yeah.
It's the new way of doing it.
The new thing is that marketing is actually part of the product, whereas you would say that was sort of where marketing started, but the lack of marketing started everything else products.
Yeah, correct. So the book was about the problem with marketing is product-centric, and so I was proposing this sort of customer-focused framework, and the key idea was this notion of experience. Okay? And by experience, I meant something that happens sort of in the here and now, okay? And that stimulates people, gets them to think, gets them to feel in certain ways.
You drew on your experience, your expertise in psychology and that cognitive science and different ways the brain functions in terms of kinds of experiences we have.
Correct. That's all that stuff. And then I said, the idea of touch points, I call them experience providers, everything has to be integrated. And the idea was, of course, the product, but there was also the packaging, and there was the communications, all sorts of traditional communications back then, and the websites.
And the websites.
And the website. So that was it. Now it's, of course, the more complex.
And then what sort of happened? I feel like sort of experience was like a really big focus for marketers for a few years, and then it quieted down a little bit, and then it sort of resurfaced.
Yeah, that's right. I think it resurfaced because of this interest in the user experience, right? It's a term for today. The idea of digital experience, right? We heard about that, about the mobile platforms that create experiences. Even, we heard it from Donna Hoffman, well, in the future there'll be this Internet of Things, and these devices will be connected, and through these connected devices, new experiences will be created for customers. So that's sort of where we are.
So maybe in some sense,
trivial in a way.
Because we have so many things to keep track of, and so we need sort of a unifying theme to sort of integrate all these multiplying. What are you doing on Snapchat? What are you doing on Instagram and packaging and everything?
And it's trivial.
Yeah.
It's a trivial idea.
It's a trivial.
It's still a trivial idea, but it's a difficult one. That's the point.
Yeah, it's
right?
hard to execute.
It's very, very hard to execute. So that was one part of this contribution that I, in a way, made to experiential marketing, right? This idea that experiences happen in so many different places in the here and now, but you have to somehow bring them together. In 1999, it was maybe different touch points, different experience providers that were important than nowadays, but the idea still exists nowadays. But the key thing is not to realize that's obvious, but it's more, how do you do that?
So you've taught, you've had some of your former students on stage here, you've spoken all over the world, you've consulted with companies. What do you see as both the companies you've dealt with directly and even the ones as a consumer that you've just experienced? What do you think makes a difference between those who really can make this happen, who can actually create an experience out of all these moments and touch points, versus those who are just sort of optimizing and making it a little bit easier and frictionless and so forth?
Right. Maybe two or three things. Number one, you have to be customer oriented, you know?
Yes.
And that's why I'm saying nowadays the word is again, well, if you have a product, if you have new technology, there are lots of new technologies now coming, like Internet of Things we mentioned, virtual reality. Last year we talked about robotics, so there are all these major technologies coming. They're sort of distracting us ultimately from the experience we're supposed to create, because we're so excited about the technologies. And that's also true for a lot of the new media, social media, sort of mobile platforms.
I thought Mitch made a good point about that he was saying how technology is becoming invisible. And I think maybe that's the trick is when the new technology arrives, whether it's robotics or Internet of Things, we're all focused on the technology, and inherently you're not really going to be able to do really create a lot of value with it until you stop having to focus so much on the technology. It becomes taken for granted. You don't have to keep talking about how you're mobile first. You just create an experience that happens to be.
Yeah, that's right. So that's one point. The second one is, nobody really talks about what experience one should create.
So is there one?
It's like, oh, we have to be experiential, you know? You've heard this many times,
yeah.
you know? You have to be experiential.
How experience, but what experience?
What experience should it be? I also addressed it in the 1999 book. In a also obvious way, you know? Well, you can create some appeal to the senses, so you do something beautiful or exciting. You can create something so that people feel good, okay? Or you can create something interesting intellectually, or you can get them to behave or to relate to the brand and so on. I call it sense field thing activate, okay? That's one way of looking at it. You can look at it in other ways. The authenticity thing has become really, really big.
So
we have to create authentic experiences.
Should all experiences be authentic? Is there room for an inauthentic experience? Is that sort of the synonymous, that if you create an experience, you are authentic? What's the relationship?
Well, fake can be fun. That's number one. And lots of authentic stuff is not at all authentic. It's faking authenticity.
And that's good enough.
It's good enough. So it is.
Okay.
Use the word authentic a lot, and then people believe you're authentic.
So, what are you thinking about these days when you see people talking about experience and connection with these different parts of business? What interests you still? I mean, you've been doing academic research at the same time over the last 15 years, and other colleagues building on your work, looking at how we actually measure and demonstrate things like the fact that communications that are more experiential by design rather than more sort of as pure traditional branding approach or sort of positioning strategy are actually more effective in terms of behavioral change. But what are you doing now? That's been shown. You've sort of created these cognitive maps early on. You've looked at how it can connect different touch points that we had before versus ones we have now. Is there still an open question about experience that's bugging you?
No.
No?
I mean, I was finished with that topic in 2003.
Okay. It just came back to haunt.
Yeah, you know how it goes once the business people use the term. I mean, it's already over 10 years, you know?
It's dead to me.
It's dead to me. So, yeah,
So what's exciting you these days? What are you doing that's fun?
Well, you know, I'm into robots, right?
Yes.
I really, really believe the robots are coming. I really believe the robots will put us all out of jobs.
But are we going to be happy about that?
Oh, that's a good question, because, you know, when I said I finished the experience in 2003, that's right. But then I wrote this.
That was your book, Customer Experience Management.
Yeah, Customer Experience Management.
And then our book, There's No Business That's Not
That's
Show
right.
Business. Two books
that was
yeah.
about entertainment
Yeah,
experiences,
yeah.
right? There's no business that's not show business, right? But I wrote another one called Happy Customers Everywhere, right? So the point in that book was, well, the point of experience is ultimately to make people happy. I think that was an interesting point, you know.
Sure.
Also in a way trivial, right?
But there are different kinds of happiness.
Yeah, different kinds of happiness and all of that. So just like, you know, you don't just want to create experience, you don't want it to be just experiential and have all these experience touch points. Fine, but what is the ultimate outcome you want to achieve? And the argument was you want a happy customer, okay? And there are different kinds of happiness. I had in that book, like, you know, happiness can be pleasure, but happiness can also be meaning, right? And so on and so on. So that was that book. So the question that, anyway, that still interests me is, you know, how can you make people happy?
Yeah.
And will they be happy when you have a world of robots? Okay? So imagine for a moment that you will not be interacting with people anymore when you're you know, checking in for something, or when you're going to a restaurant, or,
Yeah.
or when you're having elder care. And I'm choosing these examples because they all exist already, right?
Right.
There are robots in elder care in Japan. There are robots in Singapore that do the restaurant services. There are numerous robots that help you with other things. There's great informational robots like Watson, right? And so on. So will people be happy when this is all done by technology? And vice versa, will they be happy when they have much less to do? Because, you know, my job as a professor is one of the jobs that will go very quickly.
So Watson is just going to be teaching a class.
Of course. You can get a lot of the information that I teach anyway already on Wikipedia, you know, in other places, yeah. But the question is always, this personal content, that interests me. This personal content that you have in a classroom,
Right.
or that you have when you are when you're an old person.
Or maybe the point of the waiter is not to bring you the food, it's actually that
The chit-chat.
Actually the chit-chat.
Yeah, the chit-chat.
Coming to the table.
Yeah, chit-chat. But of course the problem is always the robots, but we do pretty good chit-chat too. and the ultimate question is, does the mere fact that you know that it's a robot no longer make you happy, right?
Yeah.
But then you also know that issue, the robots are getting smarter and smarter, so at some point in time you cannot tell anymore whether they're actually robots. So, you know, that is something that sort of keeps me up at night, right? You know? This idea of happiness of the person in the future and whether we will be happy, can truly be happy with technology. And that gets at the very
Is technology
center of life.
making us happier or less happy, or is it
Right.
neutral?
And that gets us at the very center of Brite. Because Brite stands for Brand Innovation Technology, right? And we always sort of have explored this interaction and the new developments there and what value it creates and so on. But the ultimate deep question is, if you take this technology to its extreme, right? What happens? And will that make people happy? And what will happen to this interaction of brand innovation technology then? And do people really know? I don't know.
Yeah, and I wonder, you know, we've got the panel tomorrow that was sparked by this question you posed, looking at the revival of craft, looking at analog watches, looking at these super micro beers, vinyl records.
Yeah, that confuses me. See, that movement in a way confuses me, because if we really love technology, embrace it and so on, you know, why are people dressing vintage and are going to these rock concerts of these indie groups, and why do they, you know, want to have all these friends at home and cook with them and da-da-da? That's what we're talking about tomorrow.
But there's always been this myth that one technology replaces the other. That the old disappears when you bring in the new, and everyone assumed that when television arrived, radio was going to be dead in a few years, and when the internet arrived, television would be dead. So maybe, you know, on the one hand, I talk about this in terms of historically, technologies are additive, and we have an increasingly diverse ecosystem, but maybe if we're having, we may see ourselves in the future where in some ways parts of our lives are becoming more and more digitally and technologically, you know, animated, but we're finding other parts of our lives that are actually becoming more analog and more craft and more face-to-face, as you would say, than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
But you know, also, that's correct, but what's also happening is...
So we're going to be eating our local vor food at the farm that was just, they killed the pig outside while we're picking up our smartphones and you know, Snapchatting with somebody across the world.
And we'll have technologically enhanced ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Because there's also this human enhancement that we are becoming more and more mechanical and robotic, perhaps because of that. So maybe at some point in time the robots will be more human than we will be.
Maybe. Do you think they're going to take up knitting?
I have this, you know.
I know. That's why I love that's your tactile analog craft that you've come back to with something.
That's what I was knitting already 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a lot of fun to knit, because you know what I love about it is you do the same thing over and over and over again. It's an extremely repetitive task, but it's like meditation. And it's extremely tactile. There's incredible pleasure in the material itself when you're doing it. It's not really the outcome at the end, like whether it's a beanie or
you don't care so much.
I don't care about that. I care about the activity as such. You know, you can do that when you're 10 years. You can pick up men.
Well, do you have any questions from the audience on the subject of experience? For the guru of experience. Let's take from the middle of the audience. go with Mike.
Here I got it first. Hi, Candace Diaz, and Strategy and Imagination, which is an experiential marketing and design agency. And my question, we are actually in the fortunate position of often having clients that have budgets and have the intent and the mindset when they arrive towards us with an RFP or an existing client that they're game on with experiential. My question for you is actually, I came from the advertising world, a big agency that we've been around 2003 to 2010-ish, before digital was the biggest. Experiential was always a tack on to our ideas. And I wonder now, stepping back to a bigger agency that's not bread and butter around experiential, what your take on when a client asks, and I'm sure everyone's very familiar with this, sorry for the long-winded question, but getting to the point of when a client asks, how can I track my consumers through creating this experience? Or, how can I stick with them? I have my genuine answer to it, but I would love kind of from your overall delivery to hear what your...
So by tracking, you mean like measuring?
Measuring, how do we monetize this? And all that type of...
Yeah, that's always been a tough one. I struggled with this all in 1999. I did some research, academic research, and then I also worked, David, with an advertising firm actually on that. It's tricky because it is so much the here and now. If you really talk about the experience that way, you can do surveys, you can do focus groups, but that seems to be the right thing. I think maybe not now, but in the future, there will be real great ways of doing it. Because they used to have these tracking devices that they give people, right? In the 80s and 90s, you are somewhere shopping or you're consuming something and it makes beep. Okay, and then you're recording your experience, and that may be qualitative or quantitative or however. Well, in the future, I think there's much more a possibility to do this unobtrusively, so it doesn't have to beep anymore. You're just hooked up to some device that records it, maybe record your brain cells and that sort of thing. Now that sounds very, very futuristic, but I don't think we are that far away from it. Because the trick of measuring experiences is you have to do it in the here and now. So that's one, that's the measurement of the experience. But then you want to monetize it, or you want to link it to whether it actually had some impact. And that's also a tough one. That's a tough one, and was a tough one in traditional advertising. How do you know advertising works? But it's also a tough one. How do you know that it was these particular experiences that have sort of accumulated this ultimate revenues? I think in between is whether you get a particular kind of behavior. So we are getting a little bit in that direction. The retailers nowadays, right? They can survey already your experience in a store. They can measure that quite nicely. And then they have you, let's say, also on a mobile platform where you might be ordering something. So you've just tried on a dress, you know through the QR code which one it was and what experience you had in the changing room and so on. And now you have it also immediately in your shopping cart online or mobile, and will there be a connection between the two? So I think we're not quite there yet, but that's sort of what I think would be ideal methodologies for proving whether particular experiences in the moment actually create some monetary value.
Another question. Yes.
Hi, David. Craig Bronberg.
Oh, hi, Craig.
Hey, David.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I teach at Parsons in the School of Design Strategy, and I wonder whether one of the missing components here, it's actually built on the last question, is perhaps the measurement capabilities of traditional experiential marketing have been so focused on the fundamental components of advertising and around reach, frequency, and monetization. I suspect that one of the ways that this is changing is that service design is providing another kind of experiential perspective in which the RFM perspective is being left behind, and care, responsiveness, and access, all of which can be measured, right? But are yet to be done. Most of the measurement around that is being done for PR agencies at this point. And so there's a tremendous amount of potential change in there, and from my perspective at least, because the notion of experiential has to shift to this notion of service and responsiveness and care and access. And when brands start to see themselves that way, we stop thinking in terms of episodic relationships to products. For example, in the IoT presentation, it was all about products, not about services. And yet, IoT is all about services. So, I just wonder whether this is a branch off of experience from your perspective, or whether you think that this is a potentially strong opportunity to build on as in kind of next generation.
No, I think it's a great idea, because what you have in any service business is exactly what I just described, which is these moments, right, that are determining something. I mean, take an easy example, hotels, right, that you're all familiar with, or Airbnb,
Yes.
You're arriving, okay, all right. You're arriving, whether it's in a hotel or whether it's where you're staying, and you have some interaction, right, maybe, and then you are first moving around in a particular space, like let's say your hotel room or your Airbnb room. And that is all like that's service, that's how service really works, and it's all about the moment, right? And what happens in this particular moment. They have a concept in experience management which is called the journey, the customer journey, right? Along the touch points. But you're absolutely right, very, very often the customer journey is also done with these, if you will, advertising terms, right? Because the journey
like
is
getting them to that purchase,
yeah.
and after you got acquired them as a customer, it's like, okay, forget it.
But even when it comes to the purchase, it's like awareness and then a choice and then a purchase and then consumption. But that's advertising thinking one more time. But the service thinking would be more along the lines of these fine-tuned moments and where certain things happen. So I'm not sure I would call it service. You could take ideas from the service environment, but the notion is really this episodic idea, as you call it, right? This unfolding, right? And that needs to be captured.
One more question. Here, trying to mix up here.
Hi, Arabella Pollock from the School of Professional Studies. How important to the benefits of experience is the ability to share it with others on social media?
Well, depends on your personality. You know? For some people, it's extremely important. And there are various reasons for that. There may be because they indeed define community and friendship as this sort of sharing and all of that. Or because they are lonely, you know? I don't know. I was trained in psychology, but I don't know. Or it might be that it's not important for them whatsoever. I'm very interested nowadays in, talked about this earlier, about these, say, indie communities, about consumers that are not doing the mainstream, that want authenticity, but real authenticity, not this fake stuff, you know, that's been mass-produced and beautifully decorated, and you cry when you see it, but you know it's like just professionally produced. It has absolutely nothing to do with authenticity. So you have people that are really interested in authentic things. Yeah. That are really interested in going to the place and want to know, you know, what is in the product. They had a presentation about this morning. Yeah. And they are also very, very connected, and they're very interested in sharing their experiences.
So there may be different motivations. The desire to share the sort of social element, it sounds like, could be a key part of the experience, but actually for very different reasons for different people.
For very, very different reasons for different people. And to understand that is really digging down into how you do experiential marketing.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Schmitt. Great chat, as always.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. And I'm going to hand it over to Matt Quint, who's going to introduce our last speaker.